Welcome back to Self-Invested, where we talk about how you can do better with money. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the rent to buy scheme, a scheme that allows you to rent a property below market value to help you save for a deposit so you can buy a property outright or through the shared ownership scheme. The reason I'm making this video is because a viewer called Beautiful Light, who watched my shared ownership explained video, left a message under that video saying, "I'm trying to find out more about the rent to buy option under the help to buy umbrella. I've not seen much info and I'm thinking this might be a better option where I can initially start as renting and later purchase." And so I thought this would be a great topic for a video. I'm going to be talking about how the rent to buy scheme works, who is eligible, how the scheme works in London, where you can find rent to buy properties, and what I think about the scheme. So it was difficult finding out anything about the rent to buy scheme. It's not something that's promoted very much. I looked on the help to buy website and I couldn't find any information about it. I had to look on other websites like the Mayor of London's website and other third-party websites, other charitable organisations, to sort of find out information about the rent to buy scheme. I also don't think it's easy to find out information about the scheme because depending on where you live in the UK, the scheme's known by a different name, and also depending on where you live, the scheme works slightly differently. So for example, in Wales, the scheme is known as rent to own. With the scheme in Wales, you can get 25% of the rent that you pay back, so you can put that towards your deposit, and also you get 50% of any increase in the value of the property you're renting to help you put together a deposit to buy that property. Now, around the rest of the country, it works differently. It doesn't work the same as that. So it's only in Wales where the scheme's like that. I think maybe Northern Ireland as well, but in England, that's not how the scheme works. And also in London, the scheme's known as London Live and Rent, and it works slightly different to the rest of England. And I'll touch on that a bit later in the video. So how does the scheme work? Now, generally in England, the scheme is offered through newly built homes, and the rent that you pay is usually 20% below market level. So 20% below the level that you would pay for renting that property in the private market. Now, the reason it's below market rent is to help you actually save for a deposit. So it's not an obligation, it's not that you must, but you're encouraged to actually put that money you're saving on rent towards saving for a deposit so that you can later buy that property that you're renting, either outright or through the shared ownership scheme. Now, the tenancies for these properties are usually between 6 months and 5 years. At the end of your tenancy, you'll have the option either to buy the property outright or to buy the property through the shared ownership scheme. Now, it's not an obligation again to buy the property, but it is expected that you will buy the property if you've taken advantage of the scheme. So who is eligible for the scheme? Now, to be eligible for the scheme, you need to have a household income of £60,000 or less. Now, this is quite a bit lower than the threshold for the shared ownership scheme. For the shared ownership scheme, you need to have a household income of £80,000 or less. And the £60,000 limit goes for the household. It's not for individuals. So if you're in a couple, this means your combined salaries can't be any more than £60,000, which isn't very high and shows you that this scheme is quite specific to who it's targeted at. Also, to be eligible for the scheme, you have to be a first-time buyer or had owned a property previously but are unable to currently own a property or currently buy a property outright or even through the shared ownership scheme. So if you're actually able to buy a property in your local area through the shared ownership scheme, so you're actually able to buy 25% of a property, then you won't actually be eligible for the scheme. It's actually aimed at people who won't be able to buy a property through the shared ownership scheme as well as buying a property outright. Now, the final condition is that you need to have good credit history. Now, I believe this is because if you don't have good credit, then it's unlikely you're going to be able to get a mortgage to actually afford that property. And also, if you don't have good credit, then the housing association that's offering the property may have doubt as to whether you'll be able to keep up with your rent. Now, to find out whether you qualify for the rent to buy scheme and to see what properties are available to you, you have to actually find your local Help to Buy agent. Now, you can find them by going on the Help to Buy website, and I'll leave a link down in the description to that website if you're interested. They'll actually do an assessment on you to see whether you actually qualify and see whether there's any suitable properties for you on the scheme. So what about the scheme in London? As I said at the start, the scheme in London is known as London Live and Rent, and it was launched by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, in 2017. Under the scheme, the rent that you pay is actually lower than around the rest of the country. So instead of being 20% less than market value, the rent that you pay is around 33% less than market value. So if, for example, the average rent in London was £1,500, the average rent that you would pay under the scheme would be £1,000. Now, again, this £500 that you would be saving, you're encouraged to actually save to put towards your deposit so that you could buy that property that you're renting. Also, under the scheme in London, you have a minimum tenancy of 3 years as opposed to anything between 6 months and 5 years. To be eligible for the scheme, you need to have a household income of £64,300 or less. Now, this is slightly higher than the rest of England because property prices in London tend to be more expensive than around the rest of the country. Also, you must be renting in London and not able to buy a property in your local area, either outright or through the shared ownership scheme. So where can you find rent to buy properties? If you're in London, you can go to the Mayor of London's website and search for rent to buy properties. Most of the rent to buy properties under the London Live and Rent scheme are going to be available from 2021. So they don't have very many properties on their website at the moment. I actually had a look on the website and they actually currently only have 6 rent to buy properties in the whole of London. And so it's going to be very difficult to get one of these properties, but you can actually register your interest now and see whether you have any luck. I'll leave a link down in the description below. Also, as you can imagine, for a scheme like this, it's very oversubscribed. I've seen articles where housing associations say that there are over 1,000 people interested in very few properties, so over 1,000 people interested for tens of properties. It will be very difficult to actually get rent to buy a property, and it's likely that they will judge who is most suitable for that property in a similar way that they judge who is suitable for a council property. I'm sure they'll have some sort of scoring criteria based on your situation. The harder it is for you to be able to buy a property, the more likely it is that you're going to be prioritised for the rent to buy scheme, because it seems to be aimed at the people that are struggling the most to buy a property. Now finally, what do I think about the rent to buy scheme? I think it sounds like a very good scheme. I think the reason that it's not really being promoted is because there'll be a lot more demand than they have availability on the scheme. And so rather than promote it, I think they try and focus it a lot more towards people that are struggling the most to buy a property. Only a small number of people are going to be able to take advantage of this scheme, because if you're able to buy a property through the shared ownership scheme, then you're not going to be eligible for this scheme. So that brings us to the end of the video. What do you think of the rent to buy scheme? Do you think it's a good scheme? Is it something that you're interested in? Do you think you'll be eligible for the scheme? Are you not able to afford a shared ownership property? And is this something that will likely help you get on the property ladder? Let me know down in the description. And if you haven't already, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel to get more content like this. Anyway, take care. Bye.